subject that is not readily understood. Actually, it's a subject that has gendered a lot of misconceptions. And this is not really an admonition or an exhortation, but rather a clarification on an end-time event. And so tonight, I'd like to look at the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Valley of Jehoshaphat, that can be our title, Valley of Jehoshaphat. Now, if I were to ask general Christian public, what do you think the last battle of this age is, or the last battle taking us into the new age would be, next dispensation? Most people would respond, Battle of Armageddon, right? Not quite right. Not quite right. We often think of the Battle of Armageddon as being the last battle of the age, but it's not. There's a little interim after the Battle of Armageddon, and during this time there's another force that comes in and tries to seize Jerusalem, and this is where the final battle takes place, in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, which is outside of Jerusalem. And this is right in between the Mount of Olives on the east, and there's an invasion by an Arab force coming in from the east. And this is after the Antichrist has been defeated at Megiddo. His armies have been defeated. And you see this in Revelation chapter 19. And there's another short interim. It's about a 45-day interim after this Battle of Armageddon that there's an invasion of Jerusalem. And half of the city falls. Mount Zion is still standing. It's all over. And so just looking at Zechariah chapter 14, as I said, this is not an admonition or an exhortation, but it's just a little clarification on an end-time scene here. So we're looking at Zechariah chapter 14, beginning verse 1. It says, Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, and there shall be a great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. Now, there is a battle at Megiddo, Armageddon, and then there's another battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. These two battles take place in two different places. Actually, Megiddo is about over 80 miles to the north. Valley of Jehoshaphat is right outside of Jerusalem. So they're in two different locations, and there's two different objectives to these battles. So in the north, the Antichrist and these armies from the north actually come against the Lord. And they're gathered against him in Revelation chapter 19. And then after they are wiped out, it's about 45 days later. There's a 45-day interim, but shortly after that, there's an Arab force that comes. Some of these nations are mentioned by name, actually. They try to seize Jerusalem, and these armies are gathered at the Valley of Jehoshaphat, just outside of Jerusalem. Two different places, and as we said, they're about 82 miles apart. been in the Valley of Megiddo to the north, but two different places and two different objectives here in these two battles. So Armageddon is actually the second stage of the Lord's coming. The first stage is the rapture, and then he returns from the supper. Armageddon, then there's a short interim, and then there's another invasion of Jerusalem. And then it's at that point that the Lord stands on the Mount of Olives, and that's where these armies are dealt with in this last battle. So Armageddon is not really mentioned in Revelation chapter 19, but it's mentioned in Revelation 16. Let's look into Revelation chapter 19, verse 19. And as I said, this is not long, but just for a little clarification here, because we're coming into the days when we shall actually see this take place. Revelation 19:19. This is at Megiddo, Armageddon. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army. Can you imagine that kind of deception? That they think that they're going to make war against the King of Kings? Kind of fits into Psalm 2 a little bit, where the kings of the earth take counsel against the Lord and against his anointed, but of course they're destroyed here at Megiddo. Going on to verse 20, and the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast and them that worshipped his image. And these both were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceedeth out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. So this is the final stage, third stage of the Lord's coming, takes place 45 days later in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. So now let's move on to the book of Joel for a minute. Joel chapter 3. And the point is that Armageddon isn't the last skirmish. There's one more skirmish after Armageddon. Joel chapter 3 and verse 1. And it begins, "For behold, in those days and in that time when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem." And this has to refer to 1948 when they became a nation again. But this reviving was to bring about their final purge, which is coming here. Verse 2, "I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the Valley of Jehoshaphat and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land." And that's one of the big issues today over there, land. You know, we were singing about the Valley of Tears tonight. Actually, it's the Valley of Baca. And believe it or not, some of my Lebanese relatives own property in the Valley of Baca. It's the Valley of Tears. And I asked them once, I said, "Well, how come you don't sell it or do something with it?" And they said, "Well, we own the land, but other people are living on it, and the only way you're going to get them off is with a machine gun." That's the way they play over there. But that's one of the big issues in Israel is the land. And the thing is, any nation that touches Israel or divides the land is going to be judged. And also note here the phrase "all nations," which is a relative term. It essentially pertains to those who are involved here in this final skirmish here, the Arab armies. Pastor Bailey said he saw this in a vision. He saw these armies from the east coming in and invading the city, and then he saw the Lord coming and standing upon the Mount of Olives. And then he gives a command to Israel. They're reduced right down. Half of the city has fallen, and he says, arise and thresh. And so Israel at that time is empowered, and they destroy these armies that have come up against them. And also this is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 63. See the Lord coming from the east, from Edom. But still in Joel, dropping down to verse 11, 3:11, assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. Let the heathen be awakened and come up to the Valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get you down, for the press is full, the fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withhold their shining. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake, but the Lord will be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. So shall ye know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion and my holy mountain. Then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall no stranger pass through her anymore. So this is where Israel proclaims, this is our God, we have waited for thee. And you find that verse in Isaiah 25:9. Going on to verse 18, Joel 3:18, it shall come to pass in that day that the mountain shall drop down new wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters, and a fountain shall come forth of the house of the Lord, and shall water the valley of Shittim. Verse 19, Egypt shall be a desolation, and Edom shall be a desolate wilderness for the violence against the children of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. So Egypt is mentioned here. Edom is mentioned as well. But these are Arab nations. This is a different group. This is not the same as those you see at Armageddon to the north. In verse 20, but Judah shall dwell forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. For I will cleanse their blood that I have not cleansed, for the Lord dwelleth in Zion. So the final battle is not at Megiddo and Armageddon. The final battle is going to be in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, and it's at this point where the Lord stands on the Mount of Olives and empowers Israel to thresh the enemy. You see this in other places as well. Somehow this was on my mind. I know it's not a message to edify you or encourage you, but it's for clarification, because if the question was asked, when is the last battle going to take place, everybody would say Armageddon. Well, not quite right, because there's still another skirmish that takes place shortly after. And after the Antichrist vacates the city, then there's another force that tries to come in. Okay, let's look at Micah for a second. He also alludes to the Valley of Jehoshaphat. This is Micah's perspective here. These armies have invaded. Chapter 4 and verse 11, Micah 4:11. Now also many nations are gathered against thee that say, let her be defiled, and let our eye look upon Zion. But they know not the thoughts of the Lord, neither understand they his counsel, for he shall gather them as the sheaves into the floor. Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion, For I will make thine horn iron, and I will make thy hoofs brass, and thou shalt beat in pieces many people, and I will consecrate their gain unto the Lord, and their substance unto the Lord of the whole earth. This is the final skirmish right here. The Lord stands on the Mount of Olives. He empowers Israel. And then shall be brought to pass, another portion here, the book of Zephaniah. We sing these little verses at times. Zephaniah 3. This shall be reality at this point, after this enemy is destroyed there in the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Zephaniah 3:14. Sing, O daughter of Zion, shout, O Israel, be glad and rejoice with all the heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord hath taken away thy judgments, he hath cast out thine enemy, the King of Israel, even the Lord is in the midst of thee, and thou shalt not see evil any more. In that day it shall be said to Jerusalem, fear thou not, and to Zion, let not thine hands be slack. Final page here. 17, the Lord thy God in the midst of thee is mighty. He will save. He will rejoice over thee with joy. He will rest in his love or renew his love. He will joy over thee with singing. So the invasion of Jerusalem from the east will be the final showdown. So there's one more little battle, one more little skirmish after Armageddon. And at this stage, there's a national repentance, and then God restores Israel. And in fact, they are so blessed during the millennium that people want to take hold of their garment to be blessed with them. And one more verse, Isaiah 65:19. And I will rejoice in Jerusalem and joy in my people, and the voice of weeping shall be no more heard in her, nor the voice of crying. So there's 3 stages to the Lord's coming. The first stage is the rapture. There's the marriage supper, looks to be like a 30-day event. And then the Lord returns, Armageddon. And then there's another 45-day extension after that. Blessed are those who come to the 1335. And that's where the battle of Jehoshaphat, or the battle that takes place in the Valley of Jehoshaphat takes place. And it's at this point that the millennium begins. Okay, so this is not, as I said, this is not something to encourage you, but just so that we can see how it plays out in the end. Amen?